Hello, everybody. This is another episode about engineering paradise. This is the second book, and I just keep writing about it, about what I see being an ideal world. And a couple of chapters for the next couple of weeks. I'm recording two today. The first one is going to be about the Ministry of Justice that follows the lawmaking ministry. So for those of you who haven't been following, this section is all about the execution. So how an ideal world should be governed and executed on this governance. And you can go back through all the episodes. I have like a bunch of them before. Now in this case, it's about the Ministry of Justice. And the way I see it, like based on our experience with the world and documents, is that a Ministry of Justice needs to be completely unbiased. That's for sure. So that's why it's part of governance. It's not something that can be privatized. And it contains three separate elements. One is law enforcement. The other one is courts. And the third one is the correctional facilities. And I do apologize for the length of this one because there's quite a few things I want to discuss in this particular chapter with the Ministry of Justice, because there's a significant amount of problems that we're seeing today with these three things. Like, for instance, if you think about the law enforcement, there's quite a lot of talk, especially in the U.S., about police officers shooting the wrong people or shooting too early, and death occurred that way. There's also on the flip side, police officers are often in undue danger compared to other countries because there is more violence in the States compared to Canada and other countries. So there's a lot of things going on. But what seems to be universal in the Western world structure, which is the topic of the book, that's where I'm kind of pulling out the data from and looking into it, is that almost 50% of a police officer's time is spent in administration. So since we want governance in the ideal world to be as small as possible, because we don't want the population to spend too many taxes for police force, but you want the police force to be efficient, and we need to have oversight and all this stuff. There's a requirement to have proper documentation and documenting of every case, and especially part of it is because it needs to go to the courts and correctional facilities, and the police officers are the first contact with any kind of investigation, crime, complaint, all that stuff. So documentation is important, but there's artificial intelligence is getting to a point where it can manage a lot of that stuff. Like voice recognition, as an example, can be used, to take statements and record them instead of having it all written by hand. As an example, just using one point. Also, AI, if we go a little bit more advanced, could be used to analyze different aspects of complaint documents, voice recordings, and compile something into a file, images and so on, everything of relevance, kind of create a web of connections for a certain file or for a certain case, in such a way that officers don't need, or investigators don't need to pull all that stuff together and spending a lot of time doing admin work, instead of doing what the population and the officers really want to do, which is to be out there, being interactive with the public, being visible. There's a lot of deterrence for crime is to have officers or to have the police out into the public and observing and supervising. And also part of the prevention of crime or that behavior is education. And police officers, I know, a lot of them want to do a lot of education for prevention purposes, which is, that's not dangerous work, and it prevents dangerous work down the line. It's good for everybody. So we want to free the police officers that want to do that kind of social, interactive, person-to-person work. We want them to be free to do that as much as possible. So AI to remove most of that admin tasks, that would be great. And we can do that fairly easily. We just need developers and we need regulators to be okay with it and so on and so forth. So that's part of it. The other part of it is that we can use drones, aerial drones or ground drones, to do a lot of things that police officers have to do that have some amount of danger to it. And also, I just mentioned the questions of presence. So if we have ground drones or aerial drones that are visibly police, then citizens feel less concerned with their safety because there are cameras and microphones and intelligent drones that are floating around, keeping watch over everybody. That's great. And for the police officers, what that means, there's a lot more data, a lot more information for this AI that can accumulate and help investigators accumulate data and information on persons of interest, areas of interest, and so on and so forth. And then gather all that data. They're already doing a lot of data gathering using social media. In fact, an RCMP officer friend of mine, while I was working at the Ministry of Justice and then the Supreme Court of Canada in security a number of years ago, they told me at the time that they were able to get more information from social media than their own police RCMP databases, because people are putting information in there, and they're allowed to create. They're able to create connections that way. So people's habits actually add more data into social media. AI can pull that out and create cases, can pull the data out from the drones that are doing aerial surveillance, and so on and so forth. So that is very, very good for police officers. They don't need to be more out there like beating the paths and being on the streets. You can have automated systems doing a lot of it, being the eyes and ears. It can be you can increase police presence while decreasing long-term costs by doing that. Something else that these drones can do, and we already have some deployments, some test deployments, I believe, in China and a couple of other places in the world, ground drones that have AIs. These AI, if they're smart enough, and they can certainly be, they can interact with people on the street. So people can come with a complaint, or instead of calling 911, can have a gesture and have a drone come by and be nearby, things like that, and they can request help directly to the drone. And then from the drone, because it's connected with the internet, you can have conversations with an actual police officer as well through that. These systems can facilitate and ease with a lot with police work, as well as creating more security. Something else that drones can do, and we'll cover this with the health as well, is that they can bring some equipment to first responders. Because they are already surveilling and looking out, if there is an accident, they can identify as an accident, or identify somebody falling, like on the sidewalk, something like that. The drone can capture that because it's present, but it can also come in and deliver first aid, like first aid kits, not the actual first aid necessarily. Defibrillators. There's already a company that has been working on that. Like that's make a portable defibrillator that is safe to first responders, civilians that are already nearby. So that allows people to act on a friendly civilian that is in need, with first aid equipment and provisions and defibs and whatever else is needed. So that's all really cool for us and our safety. So let's do some of that. Now, if we think about the courts, which is my second point here, in some countries, judges are elected and have a platform like politicians. I don't really advise doing that, because again, we want to be everybody that is inside the system to be unbiased, and we are forced to use humans because we can't automate, and because AI are entirely automated. Humans have a tendency to be biased, especially if they have to cut something that's not obvious, like a court case, and they have to make a judgment. So so we have to have that process as unbiased as possible. So you can still go through a voting process, but it has to be through the same kind of system as we were discussing for the leaders of the ministries or the leaders of the government. It has to be experts that are voting in a colleague or a peer of some sort that does not campaign. So it's just kind of elevate that person. Okay, well, you're a judge. Or it could be through merit. Different countries use different methods. It can be a job where you have, if it's merit, is the person that is most knowledgeable, but also fair to the population. That's the person that gets the job of being a judge at this or that court. That can work really well. So that's the first point about the court system. The second court system that I think that is still viable from today to the future is that we have to have free counsel for everybody. So whether you're prosecuting or you want to sue for some reason, some injustice, or you're defending, I think the country has to provide a fair quality defense or prosecution for a case that has some validity. Alternatively, I think the private hiring a private barrister could certainly work really well still in this system for those who want a specific individual that has certain amount of knowledge, certain expertise, and so on and so forth. I think that's okay. But we've seen in some of the parts of the Western world, we want to avoid situations where the person that has a lot of money actually dominates those that are using the public servant. So we need quality lawyers that have full access of AI information, everything that a private firm would. Is the only difference you're having is whether you want it for free or you want a specific person. That's what you're buying. Specific person, perhaps with specific expertise, for example. But we don't want to see that big divide. And that's a little bit of a finicky subject, and I don't want to get too deep into. There are probably ways to do that nicely. And that's fine. As far as reducing the burden on the justice system in general, like the court system, I mean, there's two things that need to be done. First, you need to introduce more artificial intelligence again. We need to automate a lot of processes. In a lot of courts and court cases, well, in the Western world, most of them actually are based on precedent. So they're the judgment based on precedent. So there are facts, there are precedents. AI can do a lot of research. There's a lot of cases. Legal assistants generally do almost exclusively that. They do research for precedents. They're trying to find the cases that are similar so that a judge can match a judgment, and they can also argue in front of the court or in front of a board of peers, to a jury, sorry, that tried to do a judgment. You want to be able to appeal with a good arguments based on precedent. Well, AI can research the proper precedents based on the different data and facts and similarities between cases. They can do it way faster than any kind of legal assistant, and way cheaper. So that adds a level of playing field. If AI, both in private firm and in the public firm, has access to the same cases, and they're both AI, so they're both very efficient at finding precedents. So it's more a question of having a different lawyer that have specialty, for example, or somebody you really like that you really trust, for example. That's the human interaction aspects of things. So AI can facilitate a lot of these court cases and bring down the size of the court cases through technology. And the second aspect is if we have less stress, which is why we're doing this, and we're explaining how stress levels can be lower by changing the systems or making systems that are ideal, then automatically we know from certain tests like universal or unconditional basic income tests or pilots around the world that if you de-stress a population because they don't need to work to live so much, or they don't have to stress about it so much, the crime rate goes down significantly. Even in Namibia, the crime rate, when they did a test in Namibia a few years ago, they did it for 2 years in an area that was fairly impoverished, and the crime rate went down by 42%. And that's directly relatable to a size of a justice system or the court system, isn't it? If you have 42% fewer crimes, then you have 42% fewer cases that have to go through the justice system in some way, even if it's just paperwork, because it's not necessarily all in courts. Judges also, pass through. They have to hear a case, for example, even though it doesn't go through a court, like a full court with arguments and things like that, right? If you can reduce that by a significant amount, like 40%, 30%, even 20%, that's huge, just because the society itself has a lower level of stress. Now, the big part, the part is that I really wanted to talk more about is the correctional facilities of the future, or the ideal ones. The systems that we're seeing in the West, in North America specifically, are often viewed as terrible. Like people, not a high amount of people actually go back to jail within 5 years of leaving. In the States, in particular, you have about nearly 1% of the population of the U.S. that is in jail or has been in jail prior. That's huge. That's over 2 million people. Okay. As far as per capita comparison, the Americans have the highest rate of imprisonment in the world. No comparison. Okay. China has fewer prisoners than the US and has a way higher population. And why is that? I don't want to get into that, because that's not the case. That's not the reason why I'm writing the next book. I want to look at the ideal. And the ideal is to look at what works in what other country it works. And the best country as far as prison systems seems to be Norway. You know, Scandinavian countries in general are very good, but Norway has the best stats. If you compare with the States, for example, the rate of recidivism, I can't say the word, recidivism, thank you, I think I got it, is 75% within 5 years. So that means somebody that goes into the prison system, within 5 years, there's about 75% chance that person will be back in again. In Norway, that rate is 20%. It's the lowest in the world. And the way they describe it, the way how they deal with their prisoners is extremely different from what we see in the States or Canada even. Their focus is really on the person. They want to truly rehabilitate the person. People have a lot of reasons why they do crime. Sometimes it's just about an emotional outburst. So chemical imbalances or social imbalances, anger, things like that, emotions. Crimes are committed because of that. Yes, all sorts, right? Some crimes are committed out of need. They don't have the basic needs, so they commit crimes to satisfy that need. That's unfortunate, but that is true. Some crimes are committed by mentally unstable people that should be in mental hospitals or receive medication or treatments to balance themselves chemically because their physiology has some kind of problem or some kind of mental disease. So they can't go, you can't put these individuals, these last cases, into a correctional facility like a prison. That does not help the individual. The person has a mental illness. You can't correct a person just by sequestering them. You're probably going to worsen the case. You put them in a mental hospital. And in the West, we actually do that when cases go in front of a judge. Good lawyers typically, if they detect or have a professional detect that there's a case for mental illness, you try to get that determined, and then the person goes and gets some help. That's great. But if it's not that particular case, and there's lots of reasons why people would do crime, sometimes it's even organized, as you know, but it's not a mental illness issue. In the West, usually you just put them in jail as a way to punish the individual. And also, of course, the isolation from society so that they don't, actually harm society while they're doing their penances. Well, in Norway, that's not the approach at all. The mental ill people, same thing as the West. Well, the best way to help them is, in fact, to get them proper medical help. Fair enough. Those that are not in that camp, that have committed crimes, they put them into correctional facilities that are Norwegian set and organized, but obviously these people have some sort of psychological problem or social problem, or maybe these criminals have different ideas of how society runs or what they should gain out of society and so on and so forth. That they have all sorts of reasons that are non-sick right, to commit crimes. And what they do is they try to help the individual become a better person. So it's not about punishment at all. And so their prisons have no bars. Their kitchens are full of knives and sharp objects, because they're not as supervised as our prisons in the West. Because they want a person to feel comfortable, not to feel like they're being punished. So it's a whole different type of rehabilitation. If you want a person to become stable, a stable person with good ideas about others and society and what's good and what's wrong and things like that, you have to give them an environment where they can discover and be convinced of what is good and what works and what doesn't. So you educate them, and they educate them. They give them a good environment where they can make their own meals, where they can take care of themselves. It's a little bit like giving them an apartment sequestrated from the rest of the world, because you still want to isolate them while they get rehabilitated. And when it's time for them to come out, they feel more comfortable. They're away from the influences they used to have. They're able to make like a communal life with others that is healthy, that is not aggressive, that is calm, and there's a way higher chance that they'll do well afterwards in society. And also in their society, it's also, these prisoners that come out are also viewed as people that are well or better adjusted compared to prisoners that come out, and ex-cons we call them in the West, where a lot of people view them with fear that they'll commit other crimes, because 75% of them do commit more crimes after 5 years, within the next 5 years. In Norway, about only 20% do. And the instances of violent crime is way lower also in Norway and other Norwegian countries. So this is a great example, an ideal example, and I think I would push it one step farther. And this, let's take that example for our ideal world. Let's treat them as human beings, but also through the court system, when a case comes for a person, I would say, instead of having statutory times of sequestrations, why don't we instead decide to have them sequestered? Again, this is not mentally ill individuals, but sequester them until they are ready to be reinserted back in society. This is not them deciding, it's the professionals, right, that are supervising, that should decide, like, if this person has been rehabilitated, and that's when we decide to put him back in society. We evaluate where he's going to be put back, because if you're put back into an environment that is aggressive, that has issues, well, that's another problem that we need to face and fix to rehabilitate the individual, as well as keep him out of this situation and commit crimes again. So I believe the best for people is to truly, the system, try to rehabilitate and make sure individuals will be okay in going back. This, even for a very heinous crime, for example, this could be a fairly short amount of time. It depends on the individual and the tests we show and where he's going to go back afterwards and so on. If a person, I don't know, does manslaughter, so like goes into a fit of anger, somebody dies as a result, well, maybe it's because of very unstable situations, a lot of stress at work, and there's a lot of cumulative, maybe part of it is because it was accidental in a history. Well, if a person takes about 3 years, for example, 3 years to get all these things resolved, anger management or whatever it is, and it's stable again, well, I don't see why not. If the person is truly rehabilitated, why not just put him back? Because it's not about punishment. It's about fixing the individual, quote unquote, right? On the other hand, a person that may be a kleptomaniac or well, that would be a medical issue. But if a person has a I don't know, ideas about theft. So it's not a violent crime, and it takes this person a whole lot of time to get out of this kind of mentality of stealing, and to establish himself and be himself or being balanced in all facets of his life. Then maybe this person is going to be in the system for 10 years. But it depends what's best for the individual and also society when the person comes out. And that can be judged on a case-by-case basis. So judges would essentially, in this ideal situation, or this, what I think would be ideal, would not determine the length of the stay, but more determining about whether you go to a mental hospital or you deserve to be incarcerated or not. And incarceration would not to be a punishment. It would be more of a treatment. Okay, you did something bad and you knew about it. Well, let's treat you. Whether it takes a couple of weeks or it takes a few months, let's put you somewhere where you can get rehabilitated, and then you come back when everything's fine with you and your environment. And I think that is a healthy way to deal with this. And then there would be, just like in the case of Norway, maybe more, maybe better, way fewer people actually end up in prison and being a burden to society. I mean, if you look at just statistically, the Norway's incarceration rate is 75 people per 100,000. Okay, the US is 707. That's 10 times less than the US, the rate of incarceration, and only 20% come back into prison within 5 years. So the prison system works. We know it works because this data shows that it works. In the US, not works. It doesn't. Okay, the burden on society in the States. Let me find the statistic here because I wrote about it. The total economic toll of mass incarceration that we find in the United States exceeds $1 trillion a year. $1 trillion a year. That's about 1/6 of the total revenues of the American government. $1 trillion. Okay, that's how much it costs to the economy. How it works in the States. Well, if it's 10 times less in Norway, the economic costs in the States, if you do a direct comparison or a transplantation, which is not possible because of all sorts of social reasons, it would be gradual. But if you just were able to wave a magic wand and just do it, then the cost would be 10 times less, so 100 million instead of 1 trillion. Way better. Running the jails themselves, just the operating costs of the state prisons is $80 billion a year. That's something to think about as well, isn't it? That's just running the prisons. Again, 10 times less prisoners means $8 billion a year, 10 times less. And that is something to shoot for. And the examples are out there. We can make a little bit better, perhaps experimentally, but just pick the Norway system and just make it work and just adapt to it slowly, and then everybody's going to be better off. Anyway, that's going to be it for today. And we'll be talking about the Ministry of Security, very related, next week. Ciao for now.